You're staring at a spreadsheet filled with 10,000 raw numbers. It's an absolute mess of digits, with no discernible pattern, no story, and honestly, no obvious meaning. If you try to analyze it right now, you're literally just going to end up with a massive headache. Seriously, imagine your boss or your professor hands you that exact spreadsheet and says, "I need to know what this means by tomorrow morning." What do you do first? Well, without a system to organize and categorize that information, it's just statistical noise. Transforming that random noise into actionable, organized evidence is an absolutely essential survival skill, whether you're in the classroom or the boardroom. So, by the end of this explainer, you are going to understand the 4 foundational levels of measurement, exactly how to systematically organize raw data into a clear frequency table, and how to read grouped data perfectly. We are going to take that overwhelming spreadsheet and turn it into crystal clear insights. All right, let's dive right in. Before we can even touch a frequency table, we really have to understand what kind of data we're actually holding, because, not all numbers or categories behave the same way mathematically. We categorize data into 4 levels of measurement, basically stacking them from the lowest, most basic level all the way to the highest, most complex level. They are nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Think of them like a foundation that you build upon. Let's break down the first 2 levels. First up is nominal data. This is purely qualitative or categorical. We're talking about names, labels, or categories. Think smartphone brands like Apple, Samsung, or Google. You obviously can't perform math on these, and there's no natural, universally agreed upon order. Like, you might personally prefer pizza over sushi, but mathematically, putting pizza first doesn't actually mean anything. Next, we step up to ordinal data. Now, ordinal data is a lot like nominal data, but with one massive difference. It introduces a meaningful order or ranking. Think of ranking the top 5 U.S. national parks, or maybe a cruise survey where you rate your trip as excellent, good, or unsatisfactory. The order definitely matters. But, and this is absolutely critical, we cannot measure the exact mathematical difference between excellent and good. The ranks are there, sure, but the math between them just isn't. Now, you might be wondering, why can't we just subtract rank 2 from rank 1? Well, that brings us to our 3rd level, the interval scale, where differences finally start making sense. But interval data has a pretty quirky trait. Take temperature, for instance. If it's 0 degrees outside, does that mean there is literally an absolute absence of temperature? Of course not. 0 degrees is just another point on the thermometer. It doesn't mean nothing. As we all know, temperatures can drop way below 0 into the negatives. This brings us to a huge contrast between interval data and our absolute highest level, ratio data. With interval data, like temperature, the differences completely make sense. 100 degrees minus 60 degrees is a 40-degree difference. But because there's no absolute true 0, we can't accurately say 100 degrees is twice as hot as 50 degrees. Ratio data fixes all of that. It gives us the most information possible because it finally introduces a true 0. Think of an exam score out of 100 points. If you score a 0, it literally means 0 points were earned. Nothing. Because of that true 0, we can actually calculate ratios. If you score an 80 and your friend scores a 20, your score isn't just 60 points higher, it is exactly 4 times better. Okay, real quick, before we organize our data, here's a golden rule of rounding you need to remember. When you're doing your statistical calculations, keep your intermediate numbers as precise as possible. Never round them off early. But for your final answer, a standard rule of thumb is to carry it out to exactly 1 more decimal place than was present in your original data. Just keep that in your back pocket because we're going to need it. Now that we've got a grip on the basic levels of measurement, let's bring some actual order to the chaos. Imagine we surveyed a sample of 20 students and simply asked them, how many hours do you work per day? Their answers are totally scattered. 5, 6, 3, 3, 2, 4. You get the idea. It's a jumble. Let's build a structure to actually make sense of it all. We do this by building a frequency table. It's like a giant sorting bin. In the first column, we list our data values, the unique number of hours worked, in ascending order, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. In the next column, we list the frequency. Frequency is simply the number of times that specific value occurs in our dataset. So, looking at our sample, exactly 3 students work 2 hours, 5 students work 3 hours, 6 students work 5 hours. And here's the cool part. If you add up that entire frequency column, you get 20, which is exactly the total number of students in our sample. The whole shebang is perfectly accounted for. Now, raw counts are great, but proportions often tell a much better story. And this brings us to relative frequency. Relative frequency is just the ratio of the number of times a value occurs divided by the total number of outcomes. You can write this as a fraction, a decimal, or a percentage. Essentially, it tells us exactly what piece of the overall pie each category represents. Let's make this super easy with our example. We're going to add a third column to our table. For the students who work 2 hours, the frequency is 3. We divide that 3 by our total sample size of 20. So 3 divided by 20 gives us a relative frequency of 0.15 or 15%. For the 5 students who work 3 hours, 5 divided by 20 is 0.25 or 25%. We literally just repeat this simple division all the way down the rows. Wait, hold on. This is a really important moment to check your math. If you add up every single decimal in your new relative frequency column, what should it equal? It should equal exactly 1.00, representing 100% of your sample. If it doesn't, well, you've got a leaky bucket and you definitely missed a data point somewhere. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why we calculate relative frequencies in the first place. Once you have proportions, you can instantly visualize the true distribution of your data. A quick glance here shows us that the 30% slice, which represents students working 5 hours a day, is by far our largest group. Sometimes raw numbers can completely hide that reality, but relative frequency makes it incredibly obvious. Let's take this one step further by adding a fourth and final column, cumulative relative frequency. This is simply a running total. To find it, you just add the relative frequency of your current row to the sum of all the previous rows. So our first row's cumulative frequency is just 0.15. For the second row, we take that 0.15 and add the current row's 0.25, giving us 0.40. We just keep zigzagging down like that. 0.40 plus 0.15 is 0.55. What this instantly tells us is that 55% of all the students surveyed work 4 hours or less per day. It's a highly useful trick to instantly read thresholds in your data. Time for another quick retention check. Let's say you've reached the very last row in your cumulative relative frequency column. As we said just a minute ago, this running total should ideally land on exactly 1.00. But sometimes you might get 0.99 or maybe 1.01. Why on earth might that last entry not be perfectly 1.00? Any guesses? If you guessed rounding, you hit the nail on the head. If you had to round off long decimals in your intermediate relative frequency calculations, those tiny missing fractions can start to add up, causing your final cumulative total to be just a hair off from a perfect 1.00. This is perfectly normal in statistics, but it's exactly why we try to avoid rounding until the very end whenever we possibly can. So far, we've only looked at nice, clean, whole numbers. But what if our data is quantitative continuous data? Imagine measuring the exact heights of 100 semi-professional soccer players down to the decimal point. You'd have 100 completely unique numbers, which would make a frequency table impossibly long and totally useless. To solve this, we use grouped data. Instead of listing every single unique height, we group the heights into intervals. Notice how we have 5 players grouped into the interval between 59.95 and 61.95 inches. We have 15 players falling in the interval between 63.95 and 65.95 inches. Here is a massive rule to remember, and it's a super common mistake. Students always wonder where to put a player who happens to measure exactly on the border number. The rule is simple. Data values fall strictly between the endpoints of an interval, and not exactly at the endpoints. When creating these intervals, statisticians will deliberately use decimal boundaries, like 59.95, knowing full well the actual measured heights won't land exactly on that thousandth of a decimal. This completely prevents any confusion about which group a specific data point actually belongs in. All right, before we wrap up, let's quickly summarize the key points you've just mastered. First, you evaluate the level of your data, whether it's nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio, so you know what math is legally allowed. Second, you calculate the frequency to see how often a specific value actually occurs. Third, you divide by the total to get the relative frequency, which shows you the proportion. And finally, you add them all up row by row to get the cumulative relative frequency, giving you a powerful running total of your dataset. You've successfully taken a chaotic spreadsheet of raw numbers and built a completely structured, insightful frequency table. But here is the ultimate question. Now that you've transformed messy data into organized historical evidence, how can you use these very same frequency tables to accurately predict the exact probability of a future event? That is the fascinating leap from descriptive statistics to probability, and it is exactly what we're going to tackle in our